All right, should be good to go. Okay, so really quickly, I'm just going to go over what we got going on this week, kind of recap where we're at in the course, and then we're going to tie up a couple loose ends with the CD sets like I mentioned in my email, and then we'll start taking sort of an introductory look at just some basic Enscape concepts and just general rendering concepts for Revit. All right, so on your Canvas page for week 6, you're just right now going to see a few URL links. And I'm going to get to these in a minute, kind of when we get more into Enscape, because I'm going to kind of walk you through those a little bit. Going back to week 5, just to recap where we're at, you should be working on getting all the exercises completed for the part 1 of the lab. So we have those 4 different exercises, and you just want to make sure, go back and watch all the videos, and that you've kind of completed everything. I had one student ask me if for the Revit template file, if she could submit kind of what she had been working on with Studio, because she started off of the original template that we developed in this class, and then she kind of added to it for Studio. So if you have kind of the template modified with even more stuff in it just because you've been working on it in Studio and you want to submit it that way, that's fine. Just make sure that whatever you do end up submitting has all of these requirements for 1 through 4 in them. So that's fine though if you've kind of progressed beyond it and you don't have that original file anymore for just the template. So that is due November 13th, so you got another week to finish those exercises. And then the week after that, which is going to be right before Thanksgiving break, that's when the second part of the lab assignment is going to be due. So that's that residential renovation. So you're just going to follow along with my video where I kind of walk you through it. Should be pretty simple. And then you're going to be submitting that. Now, the requirements for that, and I kind of touched on this last week in my lecture a little bit, these are all the sheets that you're going to be required to make. And here, laid out, it looks like a lot of stuff, but really it's not that bad. Again, and you can refer to the rubric here to see exactly how that's going to be graded. I'm going to pull up just an example from last year just to give you guys an idea of what that's going to look like. And like I said, it is really not anything too crazy. So this is somebody who I graded, and I gave her full credit for it. So this is kind of your example of what a 10 out of 10 would look like for this exercise. So your cover sheet is just going to be very basic, and it's got all the components that we covered in the lecture videos in it. Okay, so index, symbols, legend, key plan, a rendering of the project, and then just a map showing where the project is. Sheet A101, this is just going to show your demolition plan. So you're just going to add in a very basic note block, and then our keyed notes are those letters that are tied to the note block. So I can see walls to be demolished, for example, for A. So I look there and it's pointing to that demolished wall. Oh, I'm sorry. All right, let me redo that again. All right, can you see that now? All right, cool. Thank you. Okay, so anyway, sheet G101, that is your cover sheet. So drawing index, symbols, legend, key plan, rendering of the project, and then the map showing it. A101, that's just your demolition plan. So again, there's the note block that I was talking about, and it's got the 3 notes tied to letters, and then those letters are just pointing to things on the plan, and then I can refer to that letter and see what that's talking about. So that's a keynote. A102, this is construction plan. So you're just basically going to be showing room tags and naming all the rooms, and then showing some key dimensions, all right, of the space. This is the finished plan. So this is basically just ripped straight out of that video where I showed you how to create a finished plan with a finished legend. So you're just going to be doing the same thing for this, and you're just going to be doing a few different finishes, noting them on the plan and calling them out. So just 3 in this case. 104, this is the furniture plan. So we're just going to be placing some furniture, and we're going to be showing some tags that's tied to each of those pieces of furniture. And then those tags are going to be tied to a schedule that's going to tell me what kind of a product it actually is. So S1, for example, sofa 1, C1, chair 1, T1, it's be like a TV stand, and then C2, chair 2. And then we have a reflected ceiling plan. So I'm just going to have you do a very basic lighting layout here in this front area, the great room and kitchen. And you're just going to be noting some of the key dimensions so that I have an idea of where this is placed. In this case, though, one thing I am noticing that wasn't included on here is you want to have kind of like a starter dimension. So if I'm just looking at this, I see a bunch of EQs, but I'm not seeing like how far away this is from this outside wall. Like I at least need to see this dimension here, like if that were 2 feet, for example, and then I would have these EQs showing me that these are equal beyond that. Okay, if that makes sense. So I just basically need a starter dimension from like an outside wall or something, or some other point of reference, and then you can add in the equal dimensions because it's obvious, you know, how far those are spaced. But kind of like here, for example, maybe I would want a dimension from the edge of this wall to the center of this fixture, and then another one here from the edge of this wall to the center of the fixture, and then I can do the EQs here. So really it's just dimension here is missing. Okay, so just make sure that for all of these, when you're laying this out, you have a point of reference dimension. And then we're going to have just a little legend here indicating the type of fixture. And you're going to also want to make sure that there's a title on all of your legends because in this case they didn't include one. So you just want to include like lighting legend and indicate what all those are with their graphic representation. A201, this is just going to be your elevations. So we're just going to do 2 elevations, one of the bathroom and one of the kitchen. And we're just going to be calling out a few finishes, things like that, just so that I can see that you're using the leaders and stuff. And also these will have some custom hatch patterns and filled regions and things that you'll be putting in for like the backsplashes and stuff like that. Something to watch out for though in this case is your cropping. So on this example, she did not have a line here on the right side that's closing off the elevation. So you want to make sure that whenever you're setting these up and you're cropping them in, that you don't accidentally crop out an edge. Okay, so if you're following along with the video, you'll be able to see how I kind of do that and just match what I do, and you should be fine. But little things like that I'll start taking points off for just because it doesn't look very good, and you want to make sure you're not actually doing that like on a real project. And then a 601, this is going to be the last sheet that I'm asking for, and this is going to be your schedules. So we're going to have a finish schedule. This is going to be based on that first finish schedule video that I put out, not the most recent one that I put out like 2 days ago. That one is related to your studio project. For this, just match what I did in that first finish video and kind of replicate it here. And then we're going to be doing a furniture schedule. And I think I show you how to do it in my video. for this assignment. But really, it's the exact same process as just putting the finished schedule together. So it's very simple. Another thing that I'm noticing, make sure that the appearance of the two schedules is consistent. So you can see here they have the headers for the columns. The text size is like way too big, so you want to make sure that all this is 1/8 of an inch, and then any like major title is going to be 1/4 of an inch. Okay, so down here they did it correctly, but there they didn't. So just make sure that graphically everything looks right. And also, if you're going to do striped rows where every other row is dark to light, do that on the other schedule as well. Okay, so don't mix and match. Just make sure that everything as you're going through this is like really consistent from one thing to the next, so that it doesn't look like it was just kind of thrown together. Okay, so that's kind of the expectation for this lab. Really, it's not that much stuff, and as long as you follow along with that video, should be in good shape. Okay, so let's see if I got anything else I want to go over here. No, I think that's it for the last week stuff. I did send out an email the other day about this video that I uploaded. Jakisha had told me that some of the students in studio wanted a better reference for putting their finished schedule together for the assignment. So I went ahead and I made this video, and I matched exactly what they had outlined in the requirements for the studio project. So the schedule that I'm setting up here is formatted exactly like the one that's in your project brief. Okay, so if you're still working on it and you need a point of reference, just watch this video. You don't have to do anything for this class. This is just to help you setting that up for the studio assignment. And the reason why this schedule is different than the one that I have for this course is because this project you're doing is like brand new, and it was a different project last year. So they kind of changed the requirements. So that's why I kind of did it differently. I did it differently in my videos, but this one should be a little bit more relevant for what you're doing right now. And either way of doing it is kind of a valid way. It's really down to preference and what each instructor's looking for. So go ahead and watch that if you need that for your assignment. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to cover is I wanted to button up a couple things that maybe I glossed over a little bit with the CD sets. So I had, let me go back here really quick. I had posted under week 3 the LinkedIn learning exercises, and these exercises were to help you get a taste of dimensioning and tagging elements. Okay, and I kind of glossed over that because I assumed you all would follow along with these and do them. Some students had issues accessing these. So what was supposed to happen, and it just worked last year. I don't know why it's not working this year. On my end, this is what I see, and I can play the video. On some of your ends, when you go to this page, the videos, it won't let you access them. All right. So you might not have gotten to do those exercises, which wouldn't really help you with tagging that much, which is really important for CD sets. So if you do want to access these, what you have to do is go to linkedinlearning.com, and you have to go up here to the top and log in. And I'm logged in already. But you have to sign in, and when it asks you to sign in, you just put in your KSU email, and it's going to link it to your Kent State, and then you'll get free access to it. So as long as you're logged in on this web page, when you go back to my page here, it should let you watch the videos. Okay, so if you were not able to access these originally, I would go to LinkedIn Learning and log in, and then come back here and then watch them and follow along with them. And I don't believe that I'm grading these this year for the lab, but it's still going to be something good for you to follow along with, just to help out if you need it. But I'm going to go over really quickly tagging, just so that we're clear on it if you did not watch those videos. So this is that file for part 2 of the lab assignment, that house that we're going to be working on. And basically on several of these plans we have to add tags to elements. Okay, so when we're tagging things, it's not too hard to do. Each type of category in Revit has a tag associated with it. Okay, so a tag is just going to be a little annotation family, like this for example. You can see when I click on it, it says it's a furniture tag, and it's just going to have a little value within it that will tie back to some sort of a schedule, so that whoever is reading your drawing set can look at the plan, see that this is sofa 1, pull up the furniture schedule, and then see, oh, S1 is a Herman Miller whatever, right? So it's just a way of keying it to a schedule. Okay, so that's why we need to tag everything, just so that just tells the person who's looking at what the heck the thing is. So we have tags for every kind of or element within Revit. We can do wall tags, furniture tags, ceiling tags, for example, and door tags. Those are probably the most common ones that you're going to be using. But there are some other tags too. So if I would go to the Annotate tab, we have a tag section here with all kinds of different tags that we can assign to things. Now, when you're using this for your projects, really you're only going to have to worry about these 2 buttons here for the most part. So tag by category, that is going to let you just click on individual elements, and when you hover over them, it's going to automatically put in the correct type of tag based on what it is. So when I hover over a door, you can see we get a door tag with sort of the oval shape, but when I hover over a wall, it's going to give us that diamond shape to indicate that it's a wall tag. All right. The other thing that you can do is tag all. So tag all is going to pull up this window here, and this is the tag all not tagged window. So basically anything within here that does not have a tag already, it's going to just add one for you automatically. So for example, if I were to look at these doors here, there's no door tags for any of the doors that I have in this floor plan. So what I can do is just click on door tags, and you can check as many of these as you want, right? So I'm just going to do door tags, and when I click apply, it's just going to put them in for me automatically, which is really, really nice. So I don't have to, if I were to undo that, I don't have to go in with the regular tag by category and click on each one individually. And also when you do that, it adds a leader to it and it puts it over here, which is, you know, usually not what you want. You usually want it centered without a leader. So tagging it automatically using this is going to save you a lot of time and make it look a lot nicer. Another part of this is you have to make sure that the actual tag families are loaded into the project file. Okay, so sometimes based on the template file that you're using, you might not have these families in here for you automatically. In my case, I did because it let me place them. But if you don't, you're going to want to load those in. So to load them into the project file, you have to go to the Insert and then Load Family. And you could, if you have the Revit library downloaded, you can load them in here. In this case, I don't have the Revit library because all those folders are missing here. So what instead you can do is click on this button here, and that's going to allow you to load families from the Autodesk Cloud. And all you have to do is search for the family that you're looking for. So if I wanted like a door tag, for example, and search there, it's going to pop up, and then you just check it, click load, and it's going to load it in for you. So I already had it in there, obviously, and it's popping up and saying I already have it. So can just override it, but now it's in there. So if it ever pops up when you're trying to tag something and tells you, hey, there's no tag family for what you're trying to do, just go to this button and search for it and then load it in, and that's going to be the easiest way to get those. So let me show you really quickly, like on a ceiling plan, for example. So these are the ones in the floor plan are pretty simple. You just do what I did with the annotation, tag all untag, and these even, and you just place it on top of it. For a ceiling plan, down to level 1 reflected ceiling plan. So what a ceiling tag looks like in Revit. Okay, so it's just going to be some text, and it's going to indicate the height of the ceiling above the floor. So let me delete this one out, and I'm going to retag it. So if I go to architecture, annotates, tag by category, and I hover over this, it's going to let me place that ceiling tag, and then I can just move this where I want it to go. If you place these and it puts the leader with it, you can get rid of the leader by clicking on the tag and unchecking the leader line, and that'll get rid of that for you. Now, what this tag is telling us is it's telling us the type of ceiling. So if I click to the ceiling, it's going to tell me that this is a gypsum wallboard on metal stud ceiling. So it's just pulling in that value there for the name. And then it's telling you the ceiling height. So that's what this 8-foot AFF means. So AFF is above finished floor. So if I were to change this to like 9 feet, you should see that tag update like that automatically. Okay. Another thing about ceiling plans one, while I am on it, is usually you want to be showing some kind of a pattern, like a hatch pattern, to indicate ceiling finishes. So in this case, it's kind of hard to see what the actual ceiling is at a glance other than just reading the tag. But a way that you can do this is if you go to your overrides. So in this case, if I go to my view template for my reflected ceiling plan, I can come in here to my model categories, and I can find ceilings right there. So here with the ceilings, you can override the projection pattern, and you can make that pattern anything that you want. So for a ceiling, or for a drywall gypsum ceiling, for example, if you click on override and you add in a pattern here, you could choose maybe a sand pattern would work well. And then for the color, you can set that to either black or gray. So I'm going to do a middle gray right here. And then click OK. And that's going to add in that pattern for you on the ceiling plan, so that's a little bit easier for somebody reading this to tell what it is. That works really well if you only have one type of ceiling. But let's say, for example, we also have let's do it up here. Let's say instead of a gypsum ceiling, we have an acoustic ceiling tile ceiling. So you can see when I did that, it changed the name of the ceiling, but it didn't show me my acoustic ceiling tile ceiling, because usually those are going to have grid lines tied to them, right? If you think of an ACT ceiling, it's got the tiles and it's got the metal grids, and that's not showing because we overrode it in the visibility settings. Okay, so if I go back here really quickly and I undo that override, you can see there's my grid I was talking about. So if you have multiple ceiling types, what you want to do is actually edit the material of the gypsum. So if I were to tab to my ceiling for the drywall, edit it, go to its structure. Here's the kind of make up in a section view of what we're looking at. So this right here is the metal stud that it's talking about, and then we have a layer of drywall, 5/8 inch drywall mounted to the underside of that stud. Okay, so if we edit the gypsum wallboard material here, we just got to click on it and then click on the three dots. Going to bring up the material editor. We can go under the graphics tab and we can put in a surface pattern right here. So it's the exact same thing that I did in the override, but instead of globally changing it for every type of ceiling in the project, we can just set it here. Let's do gypsum plaster. We can just set it here for the gypsum wallboard. And let's make sure that's set to gray again. Click apply and OK. And you can already see what that did. So now at a glance, it's a lot easier for me to tell what is a drywall ceiling versus what's an ACT ceiling, because I have different patterns kind of telling me that. So anytime you're putting a drawing together, if you can get the point across in a few different ways to just make it super clear, you know, the more information, the better. Usually, just in some cases, you don't want to, you know, add too much information in. But in a case like this, if we're trying to just show somebody looking at the plan very quickly, you know, what is ACT versus what is gypsum, showing these patterns on the surface might be a good way to do it. Okay. Also, really quickly, while I have an ACT ceiling here, many of you might know this, but if you have a hatch pattern like this where you get these lines, right? So like a ACT grid, for example, you can change the position of the ACT ceiling by clicking on one of these grid lines and just moving it, okay? So you can just click and drag and you can move it to set dimensions if you want to. By default, it's going to center it in the room like this. So you can see it's perfectly centered in the room. But something that you want to avoid, and usually when you're designing a space, you want to avoid these small slivers sort of on the outer edges, right? So this is a standard 2 foot by 2 foot ceiling. And if I were to measure this sliver at the edge, so that's 6.5 inches, which that's really not bad at all, and you could probably leave this. However, if this were too small of a sliver, let me move this in so that we get like a really small one, and then I'll redo this ceiling. Of course, it's not going to center it for me. All right, so if we get a tight sliver like this, something that you can do, and this is just a design thing, you can move this grid line so that instead of being centered, let's move this one, instead of being centered, this one perfectly aligns here so you get a full tile, and then you only have a sliver on one side. And really, in real life, that's not going to be too noticeable. So if you're OCD and everything has to be centered, in some cases you got to kind of get over that, and you just got to move it over so that you can maximize your amount of full tiles. And that's just a practical thing to like save money in real life, so you're not wasting material. So when you're designing, take that into consideration, you know, full tiles, and make sure that you're accounting for things like that. Now, on the other hand, because this is a 2 foot by 2 foot tile standard, you can center this in two ways. So Revit is going to center it like this by default, but all you have to do, and this is just a rule of thumb based on how the math works, because this is 2 foot wide, this tile, if you were to move this line to the left half the width of that tile, it's going to center it differently, but it's still going to be centered. So if I move this by a foot, right, it's still centered, but now I don't have slivers on the side. I have a lot bigger tiles. Okay, so that's just another thing to keep in mind. If you get these little slivers like that, just move it by a foot, see what it does, see if it looks better, because it's going to make it easier to install in real life. So something like that is probably a better layout. And you also want to consider kind of, what's in the space under it. But yeah, so if you're using ACT ceilings in your project, just take that into account when you're putting your ceiling plans together. Okay, I think that kind of explains the tags and ceilings and stuff pretty well. Any questions? I guess we could go over dimensions if you guys are concerned about that, because that was also something that was not, or that's something that was in those videos that you might not have seen. So if there's something that you have a question about, you can throw it in the chat, or you can get on your mic and let me know. If not, and there's no concerns about like CD set related stuff, I can move on to kind of the Enscape stuff. Yep. So, okay. So if I had my ceiling plan, for example, and you're saying you're duplicating this with detailing. So what's a change, for example, that you're making? Like if I were to delete out a tag, or grid lines like column grids. Okay, so a column grid, okay, that's a good point. Anything that is an annotation object, that is going to be view specific, right? So if I were to make a note here, like a text note. Whoops, this is a note. If I were to put that in this view, go back here, I should not see that note, right? So anything that is an annotation object, if I bring up my annotation categories, anything falling within this window here, that is something that is view specific and is not going to go from view to view. Now a column grid, if you look under model categories, that should be in here. So under grid lines, I think. Maybe. C, D, F, G. Okay, so grids is annotation. Huh. All right, let me look at this. So if I were to place a grid, that might be an exception to the rule. So a grid, in my opinion, that's like a model component, right? It's not an annotative thing, because what this is describing is the actual position of like built elements, because it appears on the architectural tab. So I guess you can think about it that way. Anything that appears in the architecture tab, that is going to show up on every single view in the same spot. Anything that is showing up under the annotate tab, that is going to be view specific. Does that make sense? Hopefully. Yeah. So like if I were to actually tie this to column geometry and move it, it's going to move the columns with it. And that's something that I would want to see on every plan. Because the thing about notes like this, right? This is not an intelligent object. And so it's not pulling the data from something. Something like this, you can actually tie to 3D geometry. And if I were to make a change, you want to see that change appear throughout the entire CD set. Okay. So it's really just a way of preventing errors, because in the old days we had to use AutoCAD, and with AutoCAD you're doing everything manually. So if you change something about the design, you have to pick up that change every single spot that it appears in the CD set, which leads to a lot of errors and takes a lot of time, and it's a lot of like reviewing to make sure you caught it everywhere. With Revit, a lot of the stuff is tied to 3D geometry, and it's intelligent enough to know when you make a change so that you're not manually, updating bits of text everywhere, if that makes sense. Any other questions before I move on? Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. To like, to like consolidate it. Okay, yeah, that's pretty simple. Let me pull up my version of that. Okay, so if I go to my schedule, what you want to do is if you go to your formatting and stuff, I'm going to come to sorting and grouping, and it should be this checkbox here, itemize every instance. By default, that is on, and you want to make sure that it's off. So if I were to turn that back on, and it's not going to show it in this case because I only painted my material in one spot. If I were to apply this to multiple walls throughout the project, I would see like PT1 like 3 times. But if you were to uncheck that, it'll collapse it and only show it one time. So I think that's maybe what you're missing. Okay, cool. Yep. All right. Any other questions before I move on? Okay. So let's go back to here. So we're going to start talking about Enscape a little bit. And so I guess the first thing that I want to talk about with Enscape. I know some of you might not have the hardware required to run Enscape. And that's a problem that we run into every year. And I talked about this at the beginning of the course. It's one of those things that's in the computer requirements for the college that just gets overlooked because they should have this in bold at the very top because this is like the most important thing on this list. Dedicated graphics card with 6 gigabytes of VRAM or greater. So that can be an NVIDIA or an AMD, and you'll be able to tell usually if you have that by the little sticker that's on your laptop. Or if you come here to System Information on your computer, under Hardware Resources, I think, maybe not Hardware Resources. Okay, under Components Display, you should see 2 sections here. So you can see I have a name and I have a name. First one is talking about your built-in graphics on your computer. Second one is talking about dedicated graphics. So dedicated graphics is a chip that they build into your computer that is made for handling like rendering applications. Okay, you can think about it that way. Or gaming if you're a gamer. But if you see that you have a second section here with either NVIDIA whatever, GeForce whatever, or AMD Radeon, then you'll know that you have a computer that probably is going to be able to handle Enscape just fine. usually that's the minimum you need. There are varying degrees to how good each of these are. So in this case, like 3070 is a little bit higher, so it's going to be able to run Enscape better. But as long as you have something here, you should be able to run it. Um, and I know that there are some of you who probably don't have that. Hopefully, it's only like a few of you. Um, but I know also some people in the other sections are running into that issue. Um, so I'm going to talk with the other two instructors for the course, and we'll see if we can kind of figure out a solution. Because really, without having the hardware that we need to run Enscape, you're seriously limited in what you're going to be able to do going forward with your project presentations. You're going to be required to do renderings for your projects, and usually they're going to want them to look, realistic to give a pretty accurate depiction of what the actual built space is going to look like. And nowadays, we have applications like Enscape, which really make your life way, way, way easier. I remember back when I was at Kent, 2013, 2014 ish, and back then we did not have an application like Enscape, which is basically, you can think of it as like a video game where you can walk around live, it's interactive. We had to render everything out kind of frame by frame, which was way harder to do, and it was way harder to get like good looking renderings. Um, that is something that you can still do without a dedicated graphics card, but your life will be severely worse. Okay, I'll put it that way. It's going to be way harder for you when it comes time to render things than it is for one of your classmates who has the hardware listed here on the requirements. It's going to let them use a program like Enscape. So I just want to get that out of the way now. But that's my recommendation long term. So if you're one of these people who doesn't have it, you might want to think about investing in a different machine that's going to allow you to do that, because just take my word for it, especially with your project right now. So you're doing a project in partnership with Vocon, right? I used to be the rendering person at Vocon. Like, I was the main rendering person, and we used Enscape. Okay, so if you want to go work at a place like Vocon, that is going to be a huge like credential on your resume when you go to apply for something. Hey, I have experience in Enscape, because believe me, there are a lot of people in firms who aren't experienced with this newer technology. Okay, so if you're somebody coming into the field who has the experience that they're looking for, then they're really going to be impressed by that. So if you're learning things like Enscape right now, I'm just telling you, like, that's what Vocon uses for the most part. If you're learning programs like Enscape, then it's going to be very beneficial to you. So I would hop on board the train, make the investment. If you need to, Christmas time, it's coming up. I would think about that. At the same time, I get it. It's very hard for me to tell you to go out and purchase a $1,000 to $2,000 computer, right? But just keep it in mind. It's listed on here for a reason, and it's unfortunate that that requirement gets overlooked so often. Something that I did last year, which hopefully, if it's very isolated this year, that only a few of you don't have the right type of computer, is I just had people partner up with a friend, and if they could just borrow their friend's computer just for like a short little bit to render out the final images for this next assignment, it's just going to be creating a few renderings, which in Enscape is pretty simple once you get things set up. So that might be a solution. If you have a friend who has the hardware needed, just say, hey, can I borrow your computer for like, half an hour or an hour during studio, and I'll render out my images, and that's it. Then you should be fine to complete the assignment. So most likely that's going to be our recommendation, but Enscape is going to be the requirement for the module at the end. So just keep that in mind, and if there are concerns specifically, reach out to me or your studio instructor and let us know so that we can get together and kind of, talk about what would be the best solution. All right. So I want to mention that first. And if you have questions about computer hardware recommendations, you can ask me. I literally just bought a brand new laptop to do this exact sort of thing. So lately I've been kind of up on all like the specs and stuff specifically for like Enscape and rendering. So if you want recommendations on good computers, I can help with that. So going back here, you have these 3 links. Okay, first one, if you don't have Enscape right now, which I think a lot of you do, which is really great, all you have to do is go here and you can sign up and get the student version of Enscape. Okay, so it's totally free, which is great, and you just click get free license. There's going to be a registration process. All they want from you is your student email, so just put in your Kent State email, and instantly they should be emailing you a license key so that you can activate and start using Enscape. And then they'll also send you the download link. If for some reason you don't have a link to download Enscape, you can go to Enscape, and I should put this on the Canvas page, 3d.com/download. And that's going to take you to the most recent versions. Okay, so you can just download it here. So you could do that now if you don't even have the license key. If you just go here and download it, you can put the license key in after the fact, but you can get it up and running on your computer. When you go to download this and install it, it's going to ask you what version do you want to install, and that's going to be totally up to you. They support a bunch of different platforms, so these are all the platforms they support. I would recommend installing it for Revit, SketchUp, and Rhino. Reason being for SketchUp, we're going to be getting into SketchUp a little bit at the end of the course. That's going to be our last module. We're going to go over some SketchUp stuff. But I really like the SketchUp version, and also I think the Rhino version of Enscape, because they're just better. The Revit version is very limited by Revit itself. Revit is and you probably have found that out now, right? Why do so many of your friends in architecture use Rhino to do all of their design work? Well, it's because Rhino is very freeform and unrestricting, okay? And that's what it's great at. You can do all kinds of crazy stuff very easily, and it's a lot more fun to work in. Revit, in my opinion, is a lot more practical, but it's also a documentation tool, right? You're not going to be laying out a set of CDs in Rhino or SketchUp. It's just not going to happen. There are ways to do it, but it's way harder. So on the other side of the coin, with Revit being more restrictive, that also carries through to the experience of using Enscape and Revit. It's just worse, but it's something that everybody deals with. Like, even though it's not as good of a plugin for Revit, it's the most widely used version of Enscape, and that's just how it is. So me personally, when I'm doing like renderings professionally, if I can rebuild the space in a program like SketchUp or Rhino and render it with that version of Enscape, I'll do that because you can make it look like way more realistic and better. So I would recommend just downloading all of these, and it'll ask you when you're installing it which versions do you want to install. I would install all of them, because you never know, like, if you get to learning SketchUp or Rhino really well and you want to do like a really high-end cool rendering that you can't do in Revit, you can go over to one of those apps and you can build it out and render it in that. But that's my recommendation. So that's where you get the license. So then we're going to talk about some of these resources that they have. So the first one is going to be talking about resources for architectural projects. And they have all kinds of great stuff on their site too. So if you go through this article, this is going to give you a really good breakdown sampling of all the areas of 3D rendering that you need to take into account for using Enscape. Okay, so the first one is textures. So textures are referring to our materials, specifically the image files that we're going to be putting in to Revit to represent a real life material. So like a JPEG or a PNG file, for example. Okay. Now, when you're doing rendering, you can get image files from anywhere, but they might not be very good for a few different reasons. And I'm going to get into this in a minute. I don't want to get off track. But like a manufacturer's website, for example, is going to have all kinds of stuff on there, but it might not look good in a rendering when you go to put it in. So if they have an image of like a carpet swatch or a fabric, you download it. For various reasons, it might not look good when you go to render it. So you want to be using specific sites to get this stuff that is made for rendering so that it actually looks good. So if you go through here, this is going to give you a breakdown of where to find good textures. Okay, these are the ones they recommend, and they are pretty good spots. The one that I like out of here is actually the first one, Ambient CG. The reason being, all this stuff is free. Okay, some of the other sites have like paid assets that you have to download. Ambient CG is open source and free, and they have 2,000. So this is going to be a really good place to go for more general things like woods, for example, bricks, any kind of just generic thing. Something that's not like specific, like a specific fabric or carpet or for example. But anything, wood tone, brick, concrete, things like that. This has a really good collection of things that you can access. So then when you find something that you like, you can just click on it and it's going to show you a preview. If you click on shading preview, you can see how that kind of looks in a 3D view and like what the 3D aspects of it look like. So you can see it's actually got some depth to it and some reflection to it. All right, but that's going to be a good resource for you. And it's all very high quality stuff too. So some of the other sites, their quality is like not very good, but these are very high resolution, good quality images, okay? And you can download all kinds of different qualities here, all the way from 1K to 8K, which is really like overkill if you know much about resolution. But yeah, the very first one is the one that I would recommend going to. Beyond that, other things like Entourage and Accessories. Entourage and Accessories are the like decorations essentially, or people that you're going to be adding in to dress the scene up. So without Entourage, we have a very basic looking scene. With Entourage, we have a lot more lively, better looking scene for our renderings. It looks a lot more convincing and realistic. So things like trees, people, furniture, you name it. And we're going to talk more about that when I actually pull up Enscape. But Enscape offers a really good library of this stuff. And whenever you can, use Enscape's version of a product because it's going to look more realistic. You can go to a manufacturer's website. You can go to Revit City, all these different websites all over the place, and get family files. But 99% of the time, they're going to look crappy when you go to render them. And that's just because, again, of how Revit is, right? Very low detail. With Enscape assets that I'm going to show you, you can get a lot more true-to-life, realistic-looking 3D models to make your renderings look better. Okay? And they're going to walk you through where all these assets are, where you can get them. Usually, you're just going to stick to the built-in ones. So these just come with Enscape by default, and they have hundreds of them. Okay, so I'll show this to you here in a minute. So you can just stick with those usually, but then there are these other places where you can get them. For Revit, though, like you can see Revit doesn't appear very much on this list. And that is just because Revit, like I said, is very limited in the kinds of content that you can bring into it. Okay, so usually just stick with the built-in Enscape stuff. People, again, that is built in. I would usually stick with the Enscape built-in people, but there's some, other places here. IES lighting, we will talk about IES. So what that is basically in Revit, when we're dealing with light fixtures, we can represent lights in a few different very basic ways. Okay, so we could represent light as just a single ball of light in a space. Let me pull this up really quick. If I were to open up the default, so let me go to my ceiling plan. Let me open up one of my, wrong project. If I were to open up one of my downlights, when you open this family file, you're going to see this yellow kind of mass in there. And it can look a bunch of different ways. For something like a can light, and this is called the light source definition, and that's going to affect how lighting appears when you go to render it inside Enscape. So if I click on that, I click on light source definition, it's going to explain to you what all those do. So the ones built into Revit, we have a first up here, emit from shape. We can, and that's what this little thing here is. If I change that, you can see it changing. So for something like a can light, we're going to emit from a small little point, and then this is what the lighting is going to look like. This thing down here. So from a single point, you can emit light out in all directions. You can emit light out in a sort of semi-spherical manner. We can do a spotlight, which would be appropriate for a can light, right? That's the correct shape that you would see on like a recessed can light. Or we can use something called a photometric web. And a photometric web is an IES file. Okay? And also you can change the shape of these. So we have plane, we have disc, we have line. That would be like a what's it called? A fluorescent tube light would be like a line, and then you would use this. So that would be a good example of that type of lighting. Can light would be point with cone, okay? But a photometric web file, what that lets you do is if I click on OK, and so these are all generic built-in Revit things. They're not very realistic looking when you render them. They don't look very good. Photometric web, if I click on OK, it's going to be something shaped like this, so it's more custom. And underneath of our family types, if I scroll down, there is a section here for a photometric web file. Okay, and I'll probably do a section or a lecture later in one of the upcoming weeks on photometric web files, IES files. But they're just files that you download and you plug in right there in the parameter window, and they will change the shape of the lighting to be something more realistic, specific to like a real product. Okay, so if you find a real product online of a light fixture, they'll usually provide an IES file that you can insert into Revit so that when you go to render it, the distribution of the light on a surface, like this for example, will look realistic, okay? And this is going to give you a better explanation of IES files. So there you can see kind of what a better distribution looks like. Something like this is what Revit will give you by default, which looks ugly, right? That looks really bad. And then something like this is what an IES file will give you, which looks way more realistic and nice. Okay, so these are your resources that they're going to recommend for where you can get those files. And again, I'll probably go into that more detail later on. Trees and vegetation, that's all built into the Enscape library. I would just stick to that. And then skyboxes. So a skybox is going to be the background image, basically. Enscape has a lot of skyboxes built in by default, but sometimes they aren't exactly what you need. So if you want to customize these, you can refer to all these to get custom ones. And then there's actually a tutorial on their site to make your own. And they have that posted somewhere. And I'll probably pull that up at some point. But if you want to make a custom background, there's a specific tutorial that they provide you can follow to put that in. The rest of this stuff, yeah, don't worry too much about. The other thing in here is free 3D rendering textures. So this is just another blog post that's going to go more into 3D textures and explain a little bit more about it. So it's going to give you some more of those places where you can go to get these. Texture Haven is another good one aside from Ambient CG. That's the one that I just showed you. Some have more or a bigger library than others. So this one, for example, they got all kinds of stuff. So they have HDRIs, which are your backgrounds, textures, which are your materials, and models for, like, if you want to import a 3D model. Usually you're not going to worry about that in Revit. But yeah, I think their stuff might be free. So if you go to assets and textures, it's sort of the same thing. And these are all just communities of people that upload their own custom made assets. And you can find one that you like and download it and put it into your file, just like you could on the other site. So yeah, I would use these if you can. Let's see if there's anything else on here to talk about. So yeah, those are all just resources for you. This is the one that I used to recommend in the past, but it's kind of an outdated site at this point. So if you want to use it, you can. It's just a little bit not as good. Yeah, I probably wouldn't use this anymore. But yeah, that's kind of the basics of these resources that you'll be referencing for rendering. So that's what I would go to. Now, on the manufacturer side, right, for more specific things, you're going to be speccing like very specific products, okay? So think things like upholsteries, carpets, stuff like that with like very specific patterns, okay? Something that's not going to be easily replicable just looking at one of those sites that I showed you where you should go to get the more general stuff. So if you were to go to a manufacturer site, usually they're going to have some kind of a sample for the product that you want. And this is just on Maharam. They have a swatch for this fabric here, right? So you're going to choose whatever color you're looking for. And then you're going to want to download as high resolution of an image of this image file as you can so that when you put it into Revit, it'll look good. Can't tell you how many times I've worked with people who just download really low resolution images for renderings and then the renderings look crappy, right? Because they don't go the extra mile to actually get good quality looking stuff. So once you find a good high quality version of this, you should usually just be able to save it. So let's download one for an example. And let's see how good this actually is. So this looks good in this view. If I were to open this in Photoshop, kind of get a taste of how this actually would look in a rendering. Oops. Okay, so the resolution, if you zoom in, it's pretty good, pretty high quality. If I look at the image, where is it? Man, it's been so long since I've worked in Photoshop. Image size. This right here is going to tell you resolution. So this is an 800 or 864 pixel by 864 pixel image. That is like a medium-sized image. So a small size would be something like 256 pixels by 256. Then you would have 512 by 512. 1K. So if you look at these, let's go back to one of those rendering resources. If I go back to ambient CG, (1K) means 1024 by 1024 pixels. And usually for smaller stuff like an upholstery, that's going to be a fine resolution to work with. For more detailed stuff, you want to bump it up to a higher quality, so something like 4K. So if you heard of a 4K television, right? I mean, sure, that's what everybody has at this point. 4K is kind of the standard thing that you're going to want to stick to for modern displays in terms of like high detail. Okay, 8K is way too big, so never download like an image file that's like 8K. You're never going to need it that big. You're just going to make your Revit file go really slow when you go to add in materials. Something like this. This is probably a pretty fine size. So make sure you're not downloading anything though that's like less than 512 probably for most stuff, or it's going to be pretty ugly, right? It's going to be pretty blurry, not a lot of detail. Okay, so the other thing that you want to check, I don't know how much this was covered in your past courses with like Photoshop and stuff, but if you're ever rendering something, you want to check that it's a seamless texture. And what a seamless texture is when we go to apply this to an object in a 3D program like Revit, it's going to take the image you're seeing before you, and to fill up the entire space of that object, right? It's going to take this image and tile it over and over, like this, for example. So if I were to shrink this down, and copy this, this is what Revit is going to be doing. Okay, it's going to be taking that one image, copying it over and over and over again until it fills up the entire object. So if it's a chair or something, it's just going to do this over the whole thing. Now, seamless is when it copies, does it appear like there's an obvious repetition from one tile to the next? Okay, so if I zoom in here, and this maybe isn't the best example, it's not totally seamless, but for something like this, you would never see the seam. You can see that the repeat from here to here isn't quite perfect, but when you're zoomed out, you're never going to be able to tell, right? It's not obvious. This kind of just looks like one big image. Something that would be, not very seamless, what you want to avoid, please, is going to Google and typing in like wood floor texture. Usually when you just find stuff like this, it's not going to be a seamless texture. So let's find one that is obviously not seamless. And you can see it'll usually say seamless on it. Okay, so another rule of thumb, stick to images. If you're finding images from like a place like this, make sure it's always a square. Never do a rectangle. Most of this stuff looks seamless though. This one is obviously not seamless. So if I were to download this, actually let's just copy it. and this is also bad because it has watermarks on it, obviously, but if I were to tile this one, right, that's a bad texture because there's an obvious hard line there of repeat. And it might sound obvious, but I mean, I see so many people with renderings where you look at their floor in the rendering and it looks like this, right? Where there's a hard, obvious line and it looks really bad. So you don't want that. Another thing that makes that line look so bad, other than the pattern not being continuous, is the lighting. Okay, so you can tell that when I butt the top of this image up to the bottom of the one above it, the bottom half of this image is obviously like darker in light tone than the top half of it, right? So you can see that the top here is lighter than the bottom here. And that's what really draws your eye to there being an obvious, difference. And then obviously, things like the lines not lining up and stuff. And there are ways to manually go about taking a texture like this. So let's say you found a texture that you really like and you want to use and you can't find something that looks like it anywhere else. But maybe it's not seamless. You can Photoshop it to where it's pretty convincingly seamless. And this is like what I used to do like on a daily basis at my old job. I used to have to find textures like this before newer tools were developed to take all the hard work out of it for me. But I had to take something like this and blend them together and make it like look obviously less seamless. So you could go in here, and I'm not gonna do it much, but you could start distorting things so that you get things lining up a little bit better, right? And then you can, what you would normally do, and crop this back in. What you normally do is you would just have the one texture like this in your workspace, and then you would go to Filter, Other Offset, and using this, it's going to move the image left and right so you can expose the repeat. So it's hard to see the repeat. Right there it is. So there you can see that's where the texture repeats, and then vertical, that's going to move it up like this. Okay. So then what you would want to do is come in here with your blending tools, and you would want to use clone stamping and kind of clone stamp this together and blend out the transition to where it looked convincing, right? And that took a lot of work. It took a long time to get something that looked nice to where it's not obvious that it's repeating, but it could be done, and that's what I would do all the time. And that's something that you might still have to do for certain things, okay? So if you're interested in a dedicated video on this, because it's kind of outside of the scope of what I want to get into, because this is a whole subject in and of itself, I can put together a video where I go through and show you how to do a Photoshop workflow where you can learn how to do this. But literally, this is what I used to do all the time. But yeah. Anyway, there are now tools that you can download that will kind of take a lot of this work out for you, and they kind of do it automatically. They work good in some cases, in other cases they don't work as well. Again, that's a little bit out of the scope, and I don't want to go too far off on a tangent. So where was I? Okay, so with textures, let's go back to textures. I want to talk about types of textures. So if I went to a site like this and I were downloading an asset for a material, like this wood floor, for example, let's say I like this. I'm going to download, let's do the 4K. Okay, and we'll just save that. I'm just going to save it to my downloads folder for now. So that's going to download a zip file of everything packaged together. And if I would open this up, first thing that you want to do when you get a zip file, hopefully you guys all know this, you want to right click on it, click extract all, and then choose a location to save that. I'm just going to leave it in my downloads folder, so I'll just click extract, and that's going to unzip the folder for me in downloads, and then I can get rid of the zipped version. Okay. Okay, so if I go in here now, this is what was in that zip folder that I downloaded. We have the preview of what the actual material looks like, but then we get all this other stuff. So when you're thinking of a material that you want to render, you're probably only thinking of this image right here, right? This is your base color image. Some applications call this an albedo. So let's go to Notepad. So what you're looking at right here, just the picture of the wood, that is called an albedo or base color. Okay, so think of this picture like that. And usually there will be some kind of a indication in the file name of what the type of material is, or what the type of image is. So this would be an example of an albedo texture map. Okay, so think of these as texture maps. A JPEG image of the material, it's a type of texture map. Okay, so let's look at what else we have in here. This one is an ambient occlusion map. And keep track of what I'm saying here, because this will be on your quiz. Ambient occlusion map. This one is a displacement map. This is usually black and white. Sometimes this is called a bump map or a height map. Okay, so anytime you see a black and white image like this, that is a bump map or a height map. And then this next one, this is called a normal map. We actually have a couple different types of normal map in here. So anytime you see a purple normal map, usually a bluish, purplish color. Okay, so that's a normal map. And then we also have a roughness map. Roughness map, usually a dark gray color or black. Okay, so that is a roughness. Now, what is the point in me showing you these? Like, what even are these different texture maps, and what's the point, right? All we're really worried about is this one right here, right? I mean, this is what shows what the material is. Well, if you were to go into Revit and you were to apply only this as your material, it's going to look pretty bad and it's not going to look very realistic. If I were just to use this, it's going to look like one of those cheap laminate floors that you get from, you know, Home Depot. It's not going to look like a real hardwood floor, not very realistic. So that's what these allow you to do. These extra maps with extra bits of information. Okay. So now I'm going to show you how we go about using these inside of Revit. So let's go back to Revit. And let's just do a very basic example. All right, so I have this just basic project file here. Nothing is really in it. I'm going to apply or create a new floor. So architecture floor, and let's just do a generic floor. Now, you can have just a regular generic object where there's nothing really specific about it, or you could have specific floor types based on each of your different finishes. So you can see, for example, they have one for ceramic tile, they have another one for wood. There's different ways you can go about doing this. If you want to go ahead and make a floor type for each different type of finish, that's a good way to do it. But for this example, I'm just going to use this generic one. I'm just going to draw a floor right there. Okay, let's go to a 3D view. If I set this to realistic, that's going to give me an indication of the material that is applied to this object. So if I zoom in really close, you can see no matter how far I zoom in, this always remains as a solid color. And that's telling me that whatever material is applied to this generic floor object does not have a texture map assigned to it. So if I go click on the floor, edit type, let's go to the structure. Right here, it just says by category, so there's not really any material applied to this right now. So I can pull up the material editor, and let's say I want to apply a custom flooring finish to this. Revit's going to come with a bunch of built-in default materials. So if I were to click on this oak flooring one, for example, and I go to appearance, here I'm going to have a preview. It's going to show me what that looks like. You can see that it doesn't look great by default, and this is the actual image file that's used to show the material. And then they also have under here this slot right here, relief pattern. They have this thing here that says based on wood grain, and that's going to show some like height variance for the wood grain. So default Revit materials, not very realistic. This is why I was talking about how if I would apply this, it's going to look like a very cheap Home Depot-ish flooring. So let me pull up this in Enscape so that we can get a taste of how these materials are looking as we edit them. I am in Project 1, 3D. So for Enscape, all you have to do is come here to the Enscape tab, select the view that you want. You have to have at least one 3D view in your project. So if you click on the default 3D view here, that little house, that'll give you a 3D view. And then if you hit start, it's going to start loading up Enscape to where we can actually fly around and see what it's looking like. So got a lot of stuff open here. Hopefully it doesn't blow up my computer. We'll see. So I'm going to let this load. Okay, so here's my wood flooring. Let's get to an angle where you can kind of see the reflections on this. I'm going to change a few settings, and we're going to get into all these settings and what they do, but I just want to explain the textures here a little bit. Okay, so out of the box Revit material, this is kind of what you're going to get. And if I go to like a steeper angle and change the lighting, you can see how this is a very glossy looking material. And for one, if I zoom in, the texture, the resolution of the texture is pretty good. It's not like fuzzy or anything, so there's pretty good detail in the actual image. But there's no there's nothing else to it. Right? There's no indication of like creases between the floorboards or any variation in roughness, right? It just looks like a solid sheet of glass. And that's something that's going to kill the look of your renderings. So you want to be using the material maps to add a little bit more to this. Now, if I were to pull up let me see if I can get a couple windows going here. If I were to pull up the settings for the material again, see if it'll let me, shoot. I gotta put Revit over here. Okay, manage materials. So if I pulled this up again, and I were to change this relief pattern thing, this might give us a little bit more variation. But in this case, it doesn't. So in the preview, you can see what it's doing. It's trying to add in some more depth to the actual material, but in Enscape, that doesn't show up, right? And it doesn't look very good. So you want to avoid using the built-in Revit materials if you can. Now, another thing to know about these materials is this little triangle shape here. So that is going to indicate an old type asset that was used in old versions of Revit. But some of these materials, if I can find one, none of them have it in this case. Some of the materials will not have that little triangle. And that means that it's a newer material that is going to show up better inside of Enscape or a different rendering plugin, right? So if I went here to this asset button, I can pull up the asset browser, and this will allow me to pull in better looking things that will render nicer in Enscape. So, and these ones will take advantage of these map types, right? I can actually input all this information to change the material. If I find one in here that doesn't have that little triangle, so you can see like these metals, for example, don't have that. If I type in wood, and I can try to find a wood floor that doesn't have it. Let's see. So there's oak. It's not really a floor material though. What's this one? Let's pull this one in because this is a flooring. So if I pull that one in instead, that's going to swap it out for this image. And here, you can see when I change that, it gives me a bunch more options. I have relief pattern. That's going to be a bump map. See, Revit calls that black and white map a bump map. I have a roughness map, and I have a base image map, okay, or a base color. And then if I applied this, it's going to give me a lot more convincing looking floor. Okay, so you can really see in this example how there actually looks like there's creases between the planks, and it doesn't look like a sheet of glass anymore. And that's because these maps here are giving it additional information of how to render it to look more realistic. So if I change the lighting to move across this, you should see some slight variations kind of in the finish. If I go to like a weird lighting scenario, it's kind of hard to see in this case. I want to show off this relief pattern. You can kind of amp this up a little bit so that it... No, it's not going to do it. Anyways, that's what these do. So if I were to turn that off, though, and I click apply, we should be able to see a difference. So let's get rid of a couple of these maps. So let's set that to a slider. See there? When I turned it off, see what that did? It totally got rid of all of my information about the creases. So that's what the maps do. They help it look more realistic and not just like a cheap solid sheet of like laminate or like this just looks like a sticker. Okay, so that's really the point. So that's one way of doing materials in Revit is sticking with the nicer materials that do not have the little triangle next to them. For Enscape, Enscape actually uses these older materials, but you edit them in a different way. So let's make a new material really quick. And I'm just going to call this one, oh shoot, where'd it go? Default new material, rename it. We're going to call this one custom wood floor. Okay, so when you're going to render a material in Enscape, all you have to do is come in here create material. You gotta create it here first, give it a name, and then just click OK. All right. Then what we're gonna do is we're gonna go to the Enscape tab, and we're going to find the Enscape material editor. So Enscape has its own material editor aside from the Revit material editor, and it's way better. It's a lot nicer to use. So now that I made that, all of the materials in the Revit project are going to show up in this list. So if I search for custom wood floor, it's going to pop up there. And here is where I get all of the spots to add in my texture files that I downloaded. So first you can see, like I said, the regular base color, the image of the wood, that is your albedo. So we're going to click on texture, and then we're going to navigate to our folder that has the textures in them. So and then we're just going to click on that, the appropriate texture, and then that's going to apply it. I'm going to apply this to my wood floor so that you can see the changes happening live really quick. Okay, so there is one texture loaded in. Next, let's go ahead and add in the height map. So under height, you get a few different options. You can do a bump map, which is that black and white map that I talked about. That's what Revit uses by default. You can use a normal map, which is the purpley one, that. Or you can use a displacement map. And out of these three, I would recommend using a normal map. A displacement map will look more realistic, but it's way more taxing on your computer. So if you have a really good computer and can handle it, you could use displacement, not just use normal. So if you click on normal map, you then select the folder, and then you locate the normal map, and then you click OK. And then you should see a slight change. After you load that, you can apply an intensity to it, so you can make it look more or less 3D. And all a normal map does is it makes it look more or less bumpy, the surface. It breaks up the reflections. So if I were to make this a really shiny floor by dragging this down, and if I get to an angle where you can kind of see it a little bit, if I mess with this intensity slider, it should start to look a little bit more 3D. And in this case, it's not doing much. Let me try the displacement map. There you can see it's really... Let me change this to the actual displacement map. And then we will knock down the intensity because that is way too much. So let's go to like really close to 0. So there you can kind of see what the idea is. So usually a normal map or a height or displacement map is going to do something like this, where it's actually accentuating the wood grain and it's making the surface appear to have more depth to it. Okay, so if you were to exaggerate that a little bit, you can see how that's really bringing out that grain and making it look like, making the light catch it. Right there, you can really see that the light's bouncing off of those individual grooves in the wood. Okay, so then the next thing would be your reflections, so roughness. So if I were to activate my roughness map, what this is going to do is it's going to make the floor have uneven reflections. So for example, if the wood was like scratched up or dirty, it would really show that off. So let's see if I can get to a spot where it shows it. So if you look at those scratches there and the reflections being broken up, if I got rid of that, there you can see that it's a lot harder to to use those or to do that. Now, sometimes for certain materials, you won't always have access to all these map types. You can generate them yourself. So if I go back to my example of the Maharam image, this is all you get by default. So you're not going to be able to do much in terms of like making the material look realistic. In Photoshop, there is a way to generate a different maps for this. So if I go to, and I don't know if they still allow you to do it. They used to. 3D layer from file. Yeah, it looks like they got rid of it. There used to be buttons in here to generate normal maps and generate bump maps. But if, yeah, it's not, that's so dumb that they got rid of it. Filter, oh, there it is. Filter 3D, generate normal map. So if I click on that, yeah, see how they say it's going to be discontinued. It's so stupid. Don't know why. It's going to pull this up, and it's going to give you a preview of an object or like a little material swatch. And if you play around with this detail scale, you can make it look more or less bumpy in 3D, right? And this blur. So let's say something like that's fine. Click OK. There's my normal map. So I'm going to save this. Oops. File export. Let's do these as PNGs. Let's go to downloads and let's do Maharam fabric. Okay, so this is going to be my Maharam normal. Then I'm going to undo this, and this is going to be my, whoops, Maharam base color, or albedo. Maybe albedo is better. Doesn't matter, but for the sake of clarity. And then you could also do a filter. Come on. 3D. Let's do a height map really quick. And you can use these maps, like I can use a black and white map as a roughness map, for example. Even though this is technically a height map, black and white information in an image can be used for like reference. So basically what that's telling Revit is anything that has a darker value, make that spot of the material more shiny, and anything that has a white value, make it less shiny. And that's how it breaks up the reflections. So for a fabric, you don't have to worry about it too much, but if I were to, you know, do something like this, just to show you the effect, save that as, crap, export. Let's call that Maharam roughness. So you won't always use all the map types for certain materials. Like a fabric, don't really worry about roughness, but it's just to show you. So let's replace my wood floor with my Maharam fabric. Oh, another thing really quickly is if you click on the actual image swatch, you can change the scale too of all this stuff. So I think by default it will link the scale for each of these together. Right, see how it says 1 meter there? So I think if you would set this to like 2 meters and you want to do it evenly for both values, height and width, or else it'll get distorted. Yeah, it'll do it for each of them. which is good. If you want to override that for some reason, you can check this, and I could scale my scratches independently of my wood floor, but you don't really want to do that. But that's how you would do it. So to switch this out, if I click on the swatch and then I go to the folder, I'm going to go find my Maharam material that I just messed with. Click OK. So there's my base color. I'm going to scale this down to something reasonable. So this is all in meters. I don't know if, yeah, let's do like 1/2 meter by 1/2 meter. Okay, then for displacement, we're going to use a normal map. So if I go back here, switch displacement map to normal map, and switch this to my normal. Then we can go to roughness, and we can switch that to my roughness. Okay, so now you can kind of see the normal map working. If I were to turn that off, set to 0, see how that kind of goes away? So originally it was maybe a little bit, oops, maybe a little bit too much, so I could set it to like 50 and get a little bit of depth in there. And then my roughness, if I were to get rid of that, you can see how the roughness kind of changes. And you can control all these through like sliders too, but that's just going to universally make it equally shiny or equally not shiny. So there's like a really shiny fabric, and then not shiny would be really rough. Okay. So that's how you do material maps. And let me pull up a different project to show you a little bit more with the time we have left. We're getting close. If I go here, I have the default Enscape sample project that I can show you. There we go. So here's the sample project. Let's go to my views. Okay, let's switch this to 3D View 1 on my sample project. Give it a second to load. Whoa, whoa, whoa. What the heck? Uh-oh. Alright, give it a second. Looks a little bit weird. It'll fix itself. Okay. Alright, so here's the sample project, and you can download this if you want and mess around with it a little bit. You can see though it's pretty big. This is on their website. It's pretty big, and you can see that like it's really making my computer stutter a little bit when I'm moving around in it, just because it's so much going on. But if I go into here and I change like the materials within the actual space, you'll be able to see how the maps and stuff that I was talking about really come into play, and they're a lot more noticeable like in an actual rendering. So let's do the side by side again really quick. Let's go to a default 3D view. When I'm messing with materials, what I like to do is go to the default 3D view like this, and that by default is going to not be cropped. It's going to be like that. Actually, if you go to a plan view, you can draw a region around a specific area you want to edit. Then you use this button here called selection box, and it's going to take you to the 3D view, crop down to that specific area. And it's just way easier to like see what's going on in a 3D view like this. Whoa. What's going on with all that red stuff? Okay, so I can see in this 3D view now the flooring a lot better, and I can see these materials. So if I were to click on the floor and edit it, let's see what material it's got on it. So it's got this floor parquet material. So let's go ahead and create a new material. Again, I'm going to do my custom wood floor. Okay, and then I'm going to just click OK, click OK. That should turn this gray. I'll let it update. There we go. And then I'm going to pull up my Enscape material editor again. So here's custom wood floor. I'm going to add my textures back in. Whoops, that's not the right material. Is it? Oh yeah, it is. Okay. And if you don't have a specific map also, like let's say I didn't have a map for like a normal map or a bump, instead of generating one in Photoshop, another thing you can do is just click on use albedo, and it's going to take this image and make it black and white. So at the very minimum, and it's going to make it look better than nothing. So at the very minimum, always click on that use albedo button and make it so that it's using something. So let's see if I can get the sunshine coming in here a little bit. So now if I get the sun going across the floor and I get rid of that, can't see too much of a difference. You can see a little bit of a difference, but you should always just use it and it'll make it better, right? So we're gonna use our normal map. Whoa. That's what happens when you use a black and white map in a normal map. So it's always gonna want a purple image, or else it's gonna look bad. So put that there, and then add in our reflections. And that's really gonna kind of make it look a little bit better when the light goes across it. Yeah. Other things that you can do with those different map types, and this is kind of a cool thing that I saw in here. Let's pull this up full screen. So if you go over here, you can see that they're actually using material maps to do stuff like this. So you can make it look like there's water on the ground. So the way that they did that, let's go back to our ground floor view. So that area right there, they split that out into its own face where they could apply material. And they did that using the, where is it? There's a split face tool somewhere in here. It's somewhere in here. I'll show it to you later. But they split the floor and then they applied just a regular like tile pattern, and then here on that spot they have a material called Floor Stone Wet. So if I go into the material editor again and I pull up the Floor Stone Wet material and I look at it, down here under reflections they have this texture, and that's what it looks like. So you can see, like I said, anything that is black on the image is going to be more reflective, and anything that is gray or white is going to be less reflective. So if I were to just get rid of that map, and so that's what's making it look like it's wet, because it looks like water because it's really glossy. So if I were to cut that map out of there, it's just going to look normal then. So you can use the maps, and that's a really good example of it, to do really cool things like that, to pull off like neat effects that otherwise you would not be able to do. Let's undo that. There we go. Alright, so what else did I want to show you? Okay, so in terms of applying materials, so we got like 20 minutes left. In terms of applying materials, there's a few different ways that you can do it, and it really depends on what the specific application is. The first way that we saw was simply clicking on the object. Sorry if I'm giving you a headache with all the moving of windows. You simply click on the object, edit its type, go to its structure, and then you can edit the actual material of the floor or whatever through the structure settings. That's the preferred way. The other way to do it is with the paint tool. Okay, so what the paint tool does, if I were to come over here to let's say this wall right here. So that wall is showing up right here. The paint tool is right here. So if I click on that and click paint, first of all, I want to see if there's a material applied to it. So if I hover remove paint, the remove paint tool, back under modify, right there. So we have paint, remove paint. If I hover remove paint over the surface, I can see that they applied a material to this face using the paint tool. So you can see right by my cursor it says facade wood 2. So that's what this vertical wood is. They use the paint tool to do that. So if I were to remove it, I should see over here that go away. Maybe. Hopefully. Give it a second. There we go. So it went away. So they did it using the paint tool. If I were to click on that wall and go to edit type, you can see that the material that's on the wall by default is this exterior white material. So usually you want to apply materials using this method where you're just, applying it to the object itself. The paint tool is handy because I can click on it and I can hover over a face, and you can see how it turns blue there. And this little menu comes up where I can choose whatever material I want. Let's just do one of these ones, for example. And I can paint it on by clicking on the face. So when I hit done, I should see that roof tile material appear here when this reloads. Like that. Okay, so that's handy because it's very easy to do. The problem with it is a lot of times, and you'll run into this all the time in real life. You get a model from somebody and you're trying to change the material, but it won't change, right? So if I went back here and I wanted to change the material the correct way, like you normally would do it, so exterior white, and I just change that to something, right? I would expect that wall now to turn green like the material. But when I do that, nothing happens. Why? Because they overrode the material using the paint tool. So the paint tool is always going to override whatever the material assignment is for the object. So if I were to remove paint and pull that off, the wall should turn green now, because that's the material that I actually applied to the object. Whoops. Let's give it a second. Okay. So all the time it happens. People who don't really know much about Revit love to go crazy with the paint tool and paint everything, and it causes a nightmare for people who have to go in and make changes. So the paint tool is fine for your own stuff, but like when you get out into like the real world and are actually doing real projects with offices full of people, try to avoid it if you can, because it's going to cause a lot of problems. But for your stuff, you can use the paint tool because it's quick and easy. So another thing that goes along with the paint tool is the split face tool. And that's what I mentioned a minute ago with how they were able to separate out that portion of the floor next to the pool and make it a different material that had that reflection map that made it look wet. So the split face tool, you can use it in any 2D view, but it really works well for elevations to split like a wall surface in half. So if I were to make let's make a section view right in front of that wall. Okay. And let's say for some reason I wanted the bottom half of this wall to be one material and I wanted the top half to be a different material. What you would want to do is you would want to isolate that wall here in this view. So let me first fix my scale so the text isn't so big. Oh geez, this is all in metric. Nope, wrong way. Okay, so that's all out of the way now. And then you want to hide all the other stuff that's in your way. So select one, right click on it, hide in view, category, and that's going to hide all of the furniture. So now I just have my wall, and let's go to a realistic view so I can see that a little bit better. Okay, so it's always good to work in realistic view when you're doing material editing onto your objects. So now I want to split that in half using that split face tool. So let me see if that tool is buried because I have this collapsed small. If I go in here now and I go to modify up here, there should be a tool in here right there, split face. So if you click on that and then you hover over the face that you want to edit, so I want to get this wall. So right there, I'm getting the face of the wall and it tells me that I am. I click on it and it's going to take me to this sketch mode. And this is kind of hard to see, so let me go back to hidden line. So you see these orange lines here. That's kind of my boundary of where I want to, or that's the boundary of the wall. What you're aiming to do in this sketch mode when you're splitting a face is you want to draw a single line and it has to end on an orange edge, okay? So something like this would not work. And also something like this would not work. I can't do a double split. You can only do one split at a time. So right now if I wanted to split this in half, I have to connect this pink line all the way over from one orange line to the other orange line, like that. So then you can come in here with your dimensions, and let's say I want this to be, let's say I want it to be perfectly in the middle. So let me go to annotate, aligned, and go like this. Whoops. And then equality, so now that's centered. Now if I click OK, it should let me. Okay, so that's now going to split this in half. And what I can do, go back to realistic. Is I can use my paint tool again. And let's find a different material. Where's that one that they had on there? It doesn't matter. Let's do my custom wood floor. So now I can just paint it to that bottom portion. So if I click on that, boom, it's going to put it right there. Now you can see it didn't go all the way, and that's because this wall here is another wall that's butting up to it. So you have to split the face on like every individual object. So I'd have to then go in here and split face on this wall and connect it like that. And then I can paint that piece, and the material should carry through. So again, let's paint it. Okay, and you can see because those walls are joined up, it's going to just repeat the material seamlessly for me, which is cool. So split face and paint, that is a very quick and easy way for you to apply materials. But again, if you come in here and you have to make a bunch of changes, not so great. So use it sparingly if possible, and I would recommend kind of staying away from it like for a real world project. Really quickly though, like I said with split face, you can only split one way at a time, and it has to go all the way through from orange line to orange line. So if I then wanted to split this again into like thirds, I would have to come back here and do split face again. And now I can split the split, right? I can click on this portion, and now I get an orange outline here where my original split line was, and I can split it like this, and that will work. Okay, and then if I take that material off, you should see it turn back to the brick. Like that. Okay. All right, so that's just a very basic, brief introduction. Oh, shoot. While I'm on the topic of materials, while we have a couple minutes, there is a pre-built library of materials in Enscape that you can utilize. So going back to the Enscape tab, they have Enscape Material Library here. And this has some good general stuff, you know, similar to like what I was showing you here with a site like this. These websites are usually going to be better quality, so I would stick to these sites for getting more general materials than what's built into the Enscape library. But there's some good enough stuff based on what you need. So, and this would be really good too for like concepts. So if you're working on a studio project and you're in the like schematic design phase or something, and you need to get like a concept render out to show to your professor, it's very easy to just pull placeholder materials from the library, and then you can apply them to the model so that you get a convincing looking rendering pretty fast without doing a bunch of work. So something like this or something like that would be really good to use this library for. But if you want to use any of these pre-made materials, so let's say this brick for example, you can just click on it and then click on import selection, and then you're going to have to choose a folder where you want to save this. So I'm going to save this to my downloads, and we'll create a new folder. I'm going to call this one Enscape Materials. Okay, so we'll choose that folder, and then it's going to save them there. And if you give it a second, it'll import. And you can do multiple at a time. So I could come through this whole library, and I could check off a bunch of these. So anything that catches my eye, and then you hit import, So I can click like 3 of these, and then I could go to plastics and I can click a few of those, right? Then you can just import them and it'll do them all at once. So kind of just go through here and see if there's anything good that you could use and load them in. Actually, let's do one of these like wallpapers, see what that looks like. So we'll import that. Okay, and then it should make the material for you. So I'm gonna delete out my split faces. You can just click on the line and hit delete and they'll go away. So let's delete that back out. And then if I go to my Enscape material editor, I should have a wallpaper in there now. Yep. So there's my wallpaper that it built the material for me, so I don't even have to go in and put these maps in. Okay. So then I can go back to Revit, and I can go to my Modify tab. If I click on Object, go to Paint. Let's find my wallpaper. Let's paint it on. Whoops. Let's see what it looks like. I think I painted it onto the ground too. Yep. But yeah, I mean, it's not too bad. So you can use these materials too, which is nice, and they're decent quality. So that's a quick little way, you know, if it's not something very specific, like something like a wallpaper, that's pretty specific, but it would be good for a concept to get the point across of materiality and to kind of like help you explore design possibilities and get an idea of like, you know, materiality, like what should be wood versus wallpaper versus concrete. But yeah, that's kind of just a basic introduction to materials and working in Enscape. Next week, we're going to dive a little bit more into just like navigation and settings within Enscape. So, you know, how do we fly around and maneuver throughout the space? Like right now I'm walking around, but if I want to not be on the ground, I can also fly, you know. So we'll cover that. We'll cover the asset library, which is also really cool. So the asset library I can pull up here, and you can bring in all of these different pre-made objects that they have in here. So let's grab a chair. And you can put it inside of the Enscape window, and then you can edit it. I can position it how I want. Come on. It's kind of finicky. Okay. I can rotate it. I can move it. Come on. I can move it. And I can scale it. And then it will put it into Revit for you. But all these assets that are in here, they render way nicer than any Revit family that you're going to find online from like a manufacturer's website. So you can see that it just throws that in there for me, and then that's going to show up in the Revit model, which is cool. So we'll go into that a little bit more, and then we'll talk about the settings here for changing how the actual rendering looks and how you can get it to look as good as you can for exporting. And then we might talk a little bit about like actually exporting renderings too. So yeah, we'll get more into that next week, but for this week, that's all you really need to worry about since you guys are here watching live. So if you want to go ahead and download Enscape if you don't have it, you can do that. You can look into those material links that I sent you. But otherwise, keep working on the Lab 2 stuff, and I will see you all again next week. All right. So have a good rest of your night, and good luck with all your other classes. You too.